Simone, as an expert in deliberative democracy, what's your take on what we've just seen across the states and indeed across Australia, across the world, with the Women's March?
So first I just want to say I participated in the Women's March. It was really one of the most wonderful experiences. It was really very uplifting. There was the energy, and the positive energy that was there was really quite amazing. One of the things about the Women's March, which really makes it different from a protest, it was a march and not a protest, unlike, for example, the protests that you see at the airports right after the executive order limiting American immigration. But this was not a protest against a piece of legislation or an executive order or anything specific. It was instead a march of solidarity, a kind of a march to get the base and to empower women to move forward. So that's why it had such a positive kind of feel to it. It wasn't, and also it was, of course, the day right after the inauguration, so there was still kind of hope that things wouldn't be, well, there's still hope. So anyway, it was a very, very positive experience. And one of the things that I liked the most about it were all the signs. And the signs, so for me, the march was a contribution of speech, really, because the signs had messages, they had arguments, they had positions, they made claims, and the funnier the message, right, the more it got on Facebook and it got circulated or it got on the news, and so the march really communicated messages in a way that simply the number of bodies, or in addition, because of course the number of people who came out in the millions was quite unprecedented. But the fact that the march itself had these messages in words of the reasons why they were marching was, I think, also very powerful and very important for the public sphere.
That's a very interesting position, because some might argue that in fact the myriad different reasons people were there, as we saw in the messages that they were carrying, made it a little bit confusing as to what it was all about. And I was concerned at one point that perhaps the power might be somewhat dissipated by the fact that it was a little bit of a hodgepodge of everything. You didn't see it like that?
No, I didn't, actually, because you're right that it wasn't a protest against one specific thing, repeal this bill or this executive order is wrong. It was a march of solidarity, which did include a lot of people. The kind of umbrella idea was women's empowerment, and I think a lot of things came out of it. One of the things that we were talking about earlier was Emily's List, the encouragement of more women to come and run for office, because there's really not enough priming of the pump there. And that's continued. There is now a permanent organization called the Women's March, which is dedicated to getting more women in politics, of create power for gendered issues, creating platforms. They have all the people who had signed up on Facebook for the Women's March are now connected to what's called 10 actions in 100 days, in which these are all actions having to do with women's issues and gender issues going forward in this administration. So it was a march to kind of galvanize the base, if you will, as they say, and it was a march to show that democracy doesn't end at the vote. As a matter of fact, in some ways, democracy begins the day after the election, because that's when citizens are really asked to participate. I mean, it's not that much effort to vote, even though it's still a lot of people don't vote in the United States. But now is the time where really, if you really care about democracy, it's going to take more energy. So it was a really good way to start the kind of next stage in women's action and women's empowerment. So I thought it was very positive.
So in terms of deliberative democracy, what's it telling us about where people are at? The fact that they would come out in their millions in that way and express a myriad of different concerns?
Well, I think the message, first of all, is that the public sphere, well, the message is, as I just said before, that democracy is not just about voting. Democracy is about having a voice. It's about a relationship of accountability and justification between citizens and power holders. And it's not just accountability where we get to throw the bums out in 4 years. It's a kind of ongoing discursive accountability where people in power really have to answer our questions and they have to justify their actions. And I think the March said you can't get away with not justifying your actions, not giving reasons, and women are a very powerful, a very caring, a very empowered group, and we are going to expect in the next 4 years that we have our questions answered. So I think it was a very positive contribution to what I consider to be the sort of main tenets of deliberative democracy.
You've written too a lot about the power of rhetoric in this way, and is there something about the way that women have done this that is different from what we've seen before?
I'm not sure. I mean, one of the things that I'm very interested in is that part of what galvanized women to come out to the march was the way in which certain rhetoric about women took place during the campaign. So I don't really think it was Trump's personal life and his personal relationships with women, which maybe is problematic, but it was the way he spoke about and to Hillary Clinton, the way you see he's speaking now to Elizabeth Warren. It was a certain type of rhetoric in the public sphere which really showed a disrespect for women as participants in the public sphere, as power holders, as equal partners in the democratic process. So it was that rhetoric that galvanized women, because he hadn't done anything yet, right? I mean, he made some promises, but it was the rhetoric. So what was interesting is so many of the signs turned the rhetoric around. The hats, right? The pussy hats, because of statements he'd made. So I'm seeing this rhetoric as being one of the things that's really motivating women to come and push back, because that rhetoric can be very hurtful and undermining of women's positions in the public sphere.
So just lastly, where to now after the march? And this is a big question for everyone around the globe, including here in Australia. There was great excitement around the time, but where to now? Where do you see this going?
Well, I think it's going to have to now focus issue by issue, and that is women's issues. So, and they're going to be kind of points. So, of course, Planned Parenthood and reproductive rights will be sort of one flank. There will be other focuses on women having to do with immigration, particularly refugees. You know, the refugee crisis really hits women and children more than it does men. And this plight is also going to be taken up as another flank. So the march, as you said, was a collection of all sorts of different people who have different kinds of concerns, and now that energy is going to have to move into different areas. And you know, we were also discussing earlier that the ACLU has just raised, in 2 days, they raised $24 million after the executive order, and it really shows that there are people who are really concerned and wanting to participate, and I think that the energy in the march is going to go forward. I think the idea of 10 actions in 100 days is very good, and so I do see some positive kind of signs that democracy is not just going to wait to the next election, it's going to keep going.